The first warning came like a whisper on the edge of the galaxy, a ripple in the stars too faint for most sensors to detect. But Earth's command center, now operating under a level 10 security alert, had the sharpest minds on the job. Still, nothing could have prepared them for what followed. At precisely 400 hours, an alarm shattered the calm of the command center. The lead sensor officer, Lieutenant Area Miles, had gone pale as she frantically analyzed the readings. "Captain, you need to see this," she said, her voice tight with fear. Captain Eleanor Drake was in her quarters, staring out into the dark expanse of space when the call came. She didn't hesitate. Throwing on her uniform, she was at the command center in minutes, her eyes scanning the screens even before she took her seat. Miles' data was right. The star systems at the edge of the Orion sector were experiencing a disruption, an unexplainable energy surge unlike anything they had ever encountered. "Schulner," Drake whispered, a cold dread creeping up her spine. The name had been whispered in the dark corners of military circles, a rumored force so ancient and terrifying that it had been written off as myth. Yet here they were, their ships emerging from the deep blackness of uncharted space. No warning, no communication, only destruction. "We've been breached," Drake said, standing up, her voice firm, commanding, but tinged with disbelief. "Activate the defense protocols. All ships report in." "Captain," said Miles, her fingers flying over the console, "the fleet is already on the move. It's too fast. They're cutting through our perimeter faster than we can respond." The sheer scale of the alien fleet was horrifying. Drake watched as the screens filled with images of warships, ships the size of moons, appearing on the edge of the system. Hundreds, thousands, a wall of destruction. They were closing in fast, already slipping past the automated outer defense satellites, bypassing every system Earth had in place. Drake clenched her fists. The enemy was not just advanced. They were deliberate, calculated, ruthless. "They'll hit Orion in less than 20 minutes, Miles said, her voice strained as she worked furiously to get the fleet mobilized. "We need to evacuate civilians now." "Not yet," Drake replied, her voice steely with resolve. "I won't pull back until we know what we're facing. I need eyes on the enemy." Her decision was swift. No evacuation yet. Not without knowing exactly where the enemy was landing, how their forces were structured, and what their capabilities were. Captain Drake had never been one to back down, and she wasn't about to start now. At her orders, the fleet's reconnaissance ships launched. Smaller, stealthy vessels designed to gather intelligence while evading enemy detection. But even as the ships deployed, Drake knew the odds were against them. The Schulner were known for their brutal tactics and superior firepower. But humanity's strength had always been its adaptability, its relentless will to survive. As the first reconnaissance ships transmitted their reports, Drake's heart sank. The enemy wasn't just attacking. They were hunting, searching for any weak point to exploit. The information was clear. Earth's forces were severely outmatched. "We won't go quietly," Drake said, her voice cold but resolute. "Prepare the fleet. This battle is far from over." As her orders echoed throughout the command center, Captain Drake knew one thing. The fight for Orion would be humanity's defining moment, and she would not let her people fall without a fight. The seconds felt like hours as Earth's fleet scrambled to assemble. In orbit around Orion, military ships of all classes, from heavily armed dreadnoughts to smaller, swifter destroyers, began to take formation. Captain Eleanor Drake's flagship, Vanguard, stood at the center of the formation, its sleek hull glowing with the soft hum of engines preparing for battle. But there was no joy in her heart. She knew what was coming, and despite her seasoned crew, she felt the weight of the responsibility press down on her. "Deploy the fleet now," Drake commanded, her voice unyielding. The tension in the command center was palpable as the orders were relayed to every ship in Earth's fleet. Each vessel had its own unique mission, but they were all aligned under one simple truth: defend Orion at all costs. The civilian evacuation was already in progress, but the city-sized ships above Orion, those too large to evacuate, would be the first to face the wrath of the Shoulner. Minutes later, the Shoulner fleet descended upon the planet with terrifying speed. The first wave arrived in a relentless surge of dark vessels, their blackened silhouettes blocking out the stars. Their shields shimmered, impenetrable to Earth's weapons, and their weapons fired in brutal, mindless destruction. Waves of energy cascaded from their ships, obliterating Earth's outer defense platforms with deadly precision. The immense scale of the invasion became painfully clear as the massive ships loomed like dark gods over the planet. "Captain, they're breaching our outer defenses," Lieutenant Miles said, her voice strained with the effort to maintain composure. "Our forces are outgunned." Drake's eyes narrowed. She could already hear the thunder of distant explosions, feel the tremors in the hull of Vanguard as the first volley of enemy fire struck their fleet. The battle had begun, and it was clear they were fighting an uphill battle. "Don't retreat," Drake barked. "We fight for Orion. We hold them off long enough to get the civilians out. Rally the fleet and charge forward." The captain's orders were met with swift, unwavering action. Earth's warships darted through space, unleashing torrents of fire in retaliation, but the Shoulner didn't flinch. Their shields absorbed every shot, their weapons fired with overwhelming force, and the Earth fleet began to buckle under the pressure. On the bridge of Vanguard, Commander Jax Nolan gripped the tactical console, his face etched with a mix of determination and disbelief. "We're outnumbered 10-1, Captain. We don't have the firepower to break through their shields. We need a new plan." "We don't need to break their shields," Drake countered, her voice cold and measured. "We need to make them bleed, push them back with everything we have." With a wave of her hand, she ordered the fleet into formation. The Vanguard led the charge, its engines roaring as it cut through the vacuum of space with the speed of a predator. It wasn't enough to defeat the Shoulner head-on, but Drake wasn't trying to win. Not yet. She was buying time. Time for Earth's people to escape. Time to understand the Shoulner's tactics, and time to look for any weakness in the seemingly invincible enemy. "We'll make them pay," she muttered under her breath. The Vanguard broke through the Shoulner's outer ranks, its weapons lighting up the sky like stars as it poured fire into the nearest alien warship. The alien ship flared as the first salvo found its mark, its shields flickering under the force of the blow. But just as the fleet's courage surged, something unexpected happened. From the Shoulner flagship, a terrifying new threat emerged. A massive alien war machine, a behemoth of living metal that descended upon Earth's forces like a storm. Its sleek black form dwarfed even the largest Earth ships, and its weapons unleashed cataclysmic force. The atmosphere on the bridge shifted as Drake saw the beast approaching. "All units, focus fire on that war machine," she commanded, her heart pounding in her chest. Earth's last hope rested on holding their ground, buying time. But the clock was ticking, and the battle was far from over. The monstrous alien war machine, the Vorin, loomed in the distance like a nightmare brought to life. Its massive form seemed to consume the void of space itself. Earth's fleet poured fire into it, yet each shot appeared to disappear into its black, impervious surface, as though the Vorin were a living entity, absorbing their efforts with ease. Every shot from Earth's ships did little more than create tiny ripples in the airless void, and for every strike, the Vorin returned fire with devastating precision. "Shields at 60%, Captain," Commander Nolan reported, his voice barely audible over the cacophony of alarms. "We're taking heavy damage. We can't keep this up for long." Drake's knuckles whitened as she gripped the edge of the command chair. She couldn't allow herself to falter. Not now. Not when the fate of Orion was hanging by a thread. "Redirect all available power to forward shields," Drake ordered, her voice a cold, controlled whisper. "We've got to keep that thing away from the civilians. All units, I need coordinated fire on that Vorin. We make it hurt, or we die trying." The Vanguard and several other ships in the fleet surged forward, cutting through space at breakneck speeds. They fired everything they had: railguns, plasma cannons, even the experimental X-17 disruptors. But still, the Vorin's shield held firm. It was like throwing pebbles at a mountain. On the bridge of Vanguard, Lieutenant Miles worked feverishly at her console. "We're not making a dent, Captain. The Vorin's defenses are too strong. We need a new strategy, or we'll be wiped out." Drake didn't have an answer. The alien war machine was too massive, too well-equipped, and its firepower, it was unlike anything Earth had ever seen. Each volley from the Vorin tore through the ranks of the fleet like a scythe through wheat. One by one, Earth's ships fell, exploding in blinding flashes of light. Their destruction sent shockwaves through the remaining fleet, but Drake remained resolute. "Deploy the last of the bombers," she ordered, her voice resolute. "We need to target the Vorin's weak points. There has to be a way to penetrate its defenses." Even as the bombers made their move, the massive war machine seemed to anticipate their every move. It let out a pulse of energy so strong that it rippled through space itself. The bombers, caught in the wave, were torn apart before they could even launch their payloads. "Captain, they've adapted faster than we expected," Nolan said, grimacing. "It's almost like they're reading our movements." Drake's eyes narrowed. She could feel it. The unnatural intelligence behind the Vorin's actions. It wasn't just the Shulnar's overwhelming firepower that made this fight unwinnable. It was their tactical brilliance. They knew every move before it was made. In that moment, Drake realized the true danger. The Shulnar weren't just here to conquer. They were here to crush humanity's will. They weren't just battling Earth's fleets. They were fighting for humanity's very spirit. "We can't break through." "Not head-on," Drake said quietly, her mind already turning over her next move. There had to be another way. Earth's people weren't going to surrender, and she wasn't about to let them lose their home without a fight. She turned to her tactical officers. "Prepare the remaining ships for a diversion. We're going to pull their focus. Vanguard will take the lead. Everyone else, stay hidden. We're going to give them a taste of what it means to face humanity's defiance." The fleet broke apart. Some ships pulled back to regroup, while others sped toward the Vorin, drawing the alien fire. For a moment, it looked like a hopeless gamble, but Drake could see the enemy's strategy beginning to unfold. The Shulnar were starting to get desperate. That was the opening they needed. Drake felt the tension surge through her veins. The Vorin was a juggernaut, but even the strongest walls had weak points, and Captain Eleanor Drake intended to find them, no matter the cost. The fleet scattered, with Earth's remaining ships weaving through the chaos, drawing the Vorin's attention away from the few still fighting to protect the civilians. The Vanguard led the charge, her hull groaning, as she surged forward into the oncoming firestorm. The Shulnar warships around them had shifted their focus. They seemed to understand. Vanguard was the target now. Earth's flagship had become the symbol of defiance, and if they were to break humanity's will, they needed to crush it first. "All units, hold your ground," Captain Drake barked, her voice sharp and unwavering. "We will take the fight to them. Push forward, all weapons on maximum." The Vanguard fired first. A heavy barrage of plasma and railgun fire shot out from the ship, slamming into the Vorin's shields. A ripple spread across the alien behemoth's surface, but it was more like a pebble tossed into an ocean than a true hit. "Shields at 40%, Captain," Lieutenant Miles reported, her hands trembling as she worked furiously to stabilize the ship's systems. "We're not holding up well." "Then make sure it counts," Drake ordered, her voice colder than ever. The fleet's last hope lay in drawing the Vorin into a trap, a strategy as dangerous as it was desperate. There were weak points in the Vorin's colossal form, and if they could target its engines and power core, they might have a chance. But to get close enough to do that, they would have to get through the onslaught of Shulnar ships covering it. "Prepare for a coordinated strike," Commander Nolan said, his voice tight with the pressure of their situation. "On your mark, Captain." Drake glanced out at the massive alien war machine, now looming directly ahead of them. It was just as she suspected. The Vorin wasn't invincible. It was overconfident. Its size and strength made it slow to adapt, and that would be humanity's advantage. "Mark," Drake called, her voice cutting through the command center like a blade. The Earth fleet, already battered and bruised, surged forward as one, unleashing everything they had. The alien warships tried to turn their focus to the vanguard, but Earth's ships were like ghosts, appearing and disappearing as they danced through the battle, forcing the Shoulner to chase them. Drake's heart pounded as she saw the enemy's movement slow, their concentration fractured. The Vorin now faced not just Earth's firepower, but its resilience. Humanity wasn't fighting to win anymore. They were fighting to survive, and in that survival, they found strength the Shoulner hadn't anticipated. "Target the Vorin's engines," Drake ordered. "Every ship, fire at will. This is our moment." The ships of Earth's fleet aligned, firing in unison at the Vorin's massive engines. Explosions flared on the alien ship's surface, lighting up the dark void like an inferno. For a moment, the Vorin's shields flickered, and it seemed as though the impossible might happen. But then, without warning, the Vorin retaliated with a massive pulse of energy, a shockwave so powerful that it sent Vanguard reeling, her hull cracking under the impact. Alarms screamed across the bridge, and the lights flickered before stabilizing. For a moment, it seemed like they had failed. "Hold steady, Captain," Commander Nolan shouted as he gripped the side of his console. The Vorin's response was swift and brutal. Hundreds of smaller Shoulner warships appeared from behind the massive war machine, launching a deadly barrage of fire. Earth's ships, now fully exposed, were in the crossfire. "Pull back," Captain Drake screamed as she slammed her fist on the armrest of her chair. "All ships, retreat. Get the civilians to safety." But it was too late. The Shoulner were closing in. A single strike from one of the smaller warships hit the Vanguard dead-on, sending the flagship into a devastating spin. The bridge shuddered violently, and Drake was thrown from her chair, her vision blurring. For a moment, the world around her was nothing but noise and chaos. She could feel the pain in her body, but there was no time for it. Not now. Through the haze, she heard Commander Nolan's voice, barely audible. "Captain, we've got one last chance. The core. If we can get there, we can take it down." Drake's blood ran cold. This was the moment she had feared, but she couldn't let Earth's last hope slip away. "Then let's make sure we finish this." Captain Drake's vision swam as she struggled to regain her footing. The Vanguard lurched violently under another barrage from the Vorin. The ship groaned and shuddered, but the crew held on, desperate to pull together for one last strike. Every movement felt like a battle against time itself, the sounds of alarms and destruction ringing in their ears. "Status report, Lieutenant," Drake demanded, her voice cutting through the cacophony of the command center. Lieutenant Miles, bloodied but determined, quickly checked her console. "Hull integrity at 30%, Captain. We're losing power fast, and our engines are on the verge of critical failure. The Vorin has us pinned, but—" "Speak, Lieutenant," Drake pressed, her mind already racing with the knowledge that their options were running out. "The Shoulner warship's core," Miles said, her voice tinged with desperation. "It's unstable. If we can hit the right spot, we might be able to trigger a chain reaction. But we need to get past its defenses, and we're not going to survive long enough to do it the conventional way." Drake's eyes locked on the tactical map. The Vorin's immense power was now its greatest flaw. Its energy core was a critical weak point. If they could strike it, the Vorin would collapse in on itself, potentially destroying the entire fleet of Shoulner ships in one final, cataclysmic explosion. "Then it's time for a suicide run," Drake said grimly. "We're going to get close enough to make that shot. Set course for the heart of the beast." Commander Nolan's expression hardened as he prepared for the final charge. "Are you sure about this, Captain? If we go in, we're not coming back." "I don't plan to," Drake said, her voice cold but filled with resolve. "We die, or we win. There's no middle ground." With that, the Vanguard and a handful of remaining ships charged forward, engines firing with all their remaining strength. The Vorin was too massive, too powerful to avoid, but Drake's tactical brilliance had an edge the Shulnar couldn't predict. Their weapons fired wildly as the fleet darted and dodged through the verage. Each hit sent the ships into uncontrollable spins, yet they fought on, unwilling to surrender. The remaining ships of Earth's fleet formed a wedge, surrounding Vanguard to shield it from the worst of the Vorin's attacks. There was no time for mercy, no time for hesitation. Each ship had only one goal now: create a window for the Vanguard to make its run. "Captain, we're getting close," Lieutenant Miles reported, her voice strained but filled with purpose. "This is it. All or nothing." Drake's gaze never wavered. She had already made her peace with the plan. It was the only way forward. Do it. All power to forward shields. Prepare the final assault. As the Vanguard plunged deeper into the heart of the Shulnar formation, the full fury of their firepower crashed into her shields, each impact reverberating through the ship like a hammer. The vessel groaned under the strain, and the forward shields flared bright, crackling with energy as they absorbed blow after blow. Then the Vorin's core appeared in their sights, a pulsating, volatile energy source that shimmered like a dying star. The Vorin sensed the danger. A new wave of Shulnar warships appeared, converging on Vanguard, but it was too late. The moment of reckoning had arrived. "Fire the Talon cannon," Drake ordered, her voice low and steady. A single shot erupted from the heart of the Vanguard, tearing through space with unrelenting force. The blast struck the Vorin's core directly, the energy cascading across the battlefield in an explosion so powerful that it temporarily lit up the stars. For a heartbeat, there was silence. Then, the Vorin's core detonated in a burst of pure destruction. The shockwave swept across the fleet, engulfing the remaining Shulnar ships and tearing them apart in seconds. The Vorin itself was obliterated, its once imposing form consumed by the eruption. The black void of space was filled with the fiery aftermath of the battle. Drake's hands gripped the edge of her command chair as she braced herself for the explosion's shockwave. The Vanguard was caught at ground zero. Its hull cracked and bent under the strain. Systems were failing, alarms blared, and the air was thick with the smell of burned circuits and smoke. "We did it," Nolan said, his voice full of disbelief. But the Vanguard was still not out of danger. The ship was barely holding together, and Earth's fleet was all but destroyed. Only a few scattered survivors remained. As the Vorin shattered, Drake knew they had won the battle. But the war, the true cost of their survival, was just beginning. The Vanguard hung limply in space, a broken husk of its former self. What had once been the pinnacle of Earth's military might was now little more than a burned-out wreck, drifting in the wake of the destruction they had wrought. The Vorin's colossal explosion had sent shockwaves through the battlefield, obliterating most of the Shulnar fleet in its wake. The price of that victory, however, was etched in the silent devastation of Earth's own fleet. "Captain Drake," Commander Nolan's voice came through the static-filled comms, his tone heavy with both relief and sorrow. "We've won, but the cost." Drake wiped the blood from her forehead, the dim glow of the command center's emergency lights flickering around her. She felt the weight of every ship, every life, lost in the battle. The Vanguard had taken the worst of the blast. Even though the Vorin was no more, the wreckage surrounding them was a grim reminder that victory had come at a steep price. "I know, Nolan," Drake replied, her voice hoarse but resolute. "But we're still here. We're alive, and we've sent a message." A message. The thought echoed in her mind as she scanned the wreckage of the battlefield. The Vorin's destruction would be remembered across the galaxy, but would it be enough? Would the rest of the Shulnar Empire finally see humanity for what it was, a species that could not be defeated, no matter the odds? Or would they simply rebuild and return for vengeance? Signal all surviving ships to regroup, Drake ordered, turning her attention back to the task at hand. We need to assess the damage and make repairs. We can't afford to linger here. A series of beeps and reports followed as the remaining vessels limped back toward the Vanguard. Scattered, damaged, and shaken, they had survived the unthinkable. But Drake could feel the exhaustion weighing on every crew member. The sacrifices they had made, the lives lost, could never be replaced. Lieutenant Miles approached her station, her face pale but determined. "Captain, we've got multiple messages coming in from the outer colonies. Some of them are asking if the Vorin has been defeated. Then we answer them," Drake said. "We've won the battle, and it's time to let the galaxy know. They need to understand that Earth will not fall." Nolan stepped forward, eyes grim. "But what do we do now, Captain? The Sholnar Empire is vast, and they won't simply disappear. What's our next move?" Drake glanced out of the shattered windows of the command center. Beyond the wreckage of the battlefield, the stars seemed strangely quiet. A sense of dread began to creep over her. The victory had been hard-won, but it was far from the end. "We rebuild," she said firmly. "We regroup, and we show the galaxy that Earth is stronger than ever. The Vorin may be gone, but the war is far from over." She paused, her thoughts drifting back to the families, the civilians they had fought to protect. Their victory, after all, had never been just about the military. It had been for everyone. "Send word to Earth," Drake continued. "Tell them that we have not just survived. We've proven that humanity can stand against the impossible, and we're not backing down." As she spoke, the faintest hum filled the command center. The damage to the Vanguard was critical, but repairs were already underway. It would take weeks, perhaps months, before the ship could be fully operational again. But the crew was determined. They would find a way to rebuild and prepare for the coming storm. "Captain," Lieutenant Miles said softly, her voice breaking through the silence, "there's one more thing. A fleet of Sholnar ships. They're moving toward us." Drake's eyes widened as she turned back to the display. A new threat, one far more dangerous than they had ever anticipated, was already approaching. The Vorin may have fallen, but the Sholnar would not forget this defeat. This was only the beginning. She took a deep breath. "All hands, prepare for battle. We've won one war, but the real fight, it's just getting started." The alert sounded through the ship's corridors, its shrill tone piercing the tense silence that had settled over the crew of the Vanguard. The remnants of Earth's fleet had barely begun their long trek back to the safety of the core worlds when the news came. A new Sholnar armada, far larger than anything they had ever faced before, was heading straight for them. Captain Drake stood at the command center, her eyes fixed on the tactical display as a swarm of red blips appeared on the screen. The Sholnar fleet, an overwhelming force of warships, had detected their weakened position and was closing in with brutal efficiency. This was no longer a retaliation mission, it was an extermination. "Distance?" Drake asked, her voice colder than she felt. "Less than 6 hours, Captain," Lieutenant Miles replied, her hands flying over the console. "They're pushing hard. They've already jumped to our system." Drake clenched her fists, the weight of their victory suddenly feeling hollow. "I want all ships prepped for battle. We've only got one chance to survive this." Commander Nolan's face was etched with grim determination. "The Vanguard isn't in fighting shape, Captain. We've barely got enough power to hold the shields together. Our weapons are down to half strength. We can't take on a fleet of that size." Drake's mind raced. There was no question about it. The Vanguard was crippled. Earth's forces were scattered and battered. Even with the Sholnar's failure to wipe them out the first time, they were underestimating the ferocity of humanity's spirit. But their strategy would need to change. They needed to fight smarter, not harder. She turned to Nolan. "We're not fighting them head-on. I want you to calculate the best course for a retreat to the asteroid belt. We'll fight from the shadows, using the terrain. We've got our agility, and they have size. We'll use that to our advantage." Nolan hesitated, then nodded. "It's a gamble, Captain, but it might just work." Drake's eyes narrowed, the familiar feeling of resolve taking hold. "We're not running. We're buying time. Every second we can buy for Earth's defenses is a victory. We've taken the first blow. We have to make sure they don't get a second chance." "Understood." Nolan tapped a series of commands into his console. "Course set for the asteroid field. We'll move fast." Lieutenant Miles piped up again, her voice anxious. "Captain, there's more. I've been trying to decipher the latest Shulnar comms. They're not just coming for us. They're coming for everything. They're going to wipe out every remaining colony and outpost across this sector." Drake's stomach tightened. The Shulnar's desire for vengeance was absolute, and humanity had now become their symbol of defiance. Earth's resistance was far more dangerous to the Shulnar than any fleet or army. It was the rallying cry for all other species that had been subjugated for so long, and the Shulnar couldn't allow that to continue. "Prepare the fleet for guerrilla tactics," Drake ordered. "We won't fight them in the open. We'll hit them where it hurts. Supply lines, weak points, and unguarded colonies. Let them think we're scattered. Let them underestimate us." Nolan nodded, adjusting his calculations. "We'll have the advantage in the asteroid field, Captain. We can ambush them and cause enough damage to slow them down." "We're not just going to slow them down, Commander," Drake said, her eyes burning with the same intensity that had kept her alive through so many battles. "We're going to make them pay for every inch they try to take." The room fell silent for a moment as the crew of the Vanguard gathered their thoughts. The long road ahead would be grueling, and the losses had been devastating. But one thing was clear: humanity would not go down without a fight. The Shulnar might have sent an armada, but Earth's will was stronger than ever. Drake turned to face her crew. "This is it. We hold nothing back. This is our last stand, and we will make it a battle the galaxy will never forget." The asteroid field loomed ahead, a chaotic expanse of jagged rocks and floating debris. The Vanguard and the remaining fleet of Earth's forces had taken refuge within its shadows, hidden in plain sight. The Shulnar armada, massive and unstoppable, was closing in, unaware of the trap they were walking into. Captain Drake stood at the front of the command center, her fists clenched at her sides as the tactical display flickered with new readings. The Shulnar had split into multiple battalions, each heading toward strategic locations. They were searching for Earth's fleet, but they had no idea what awaited them in the deep recesses of the asteroid field. "Status report, Lieutenant Miles," Drake barked, her voice steady despite the tension that gripped her. Miles, her eyes wide with a mix of excitement and apprehension, glanced at the holomap. "We've set the coordinates for our first strike. All ships are in position, Captain. The Vanguard is ready to deploy decoys and disrupt their sensors." Drake nodded. "Good, it's time. Prepare the fleet for the first wave. And, Lieutenant, once we start, we don't stop until they're broken." "Yes, Captain," Miles replied, her voice tight. The first wave of Shulnar ships entered the field, their enormous warships cutting through the debris at a slow but relentless pace. They believed they were hunting down scattered pockets of resistance, too confident in their size and power to think Earth's forces could mount any kind of meaningful defense. Commander Nolan's voice broke into the silence of the command center. "The 1st Battalion is almost in range, preparing to deploy the decoys." "Activate them," Drake commanded. The Vanguard sent out a series of high-tech decoys, small, mobile devices that mimicked the signature of the Earth ships. They would confuse the Shulnar sensors and make them think they were surrounded. In the midst of the chaos, the fleet would strike. The first explosion came without warning. A single decoy ship was struck by a Shulnar cruiser, but the real damage had already been done. In the blink of an eye, a dozen of Earth's ships emerged from the shadows of the asteroids, launching concentrated missile barrages into the unsuspecting Shulnar fleet. The first wave of Shulnar ships erupted into flames, their shields barely able to hold up against the overwhelming power of humanity's surprise attack. "Target their weak points," Drake shouted, her voice sharp with command. "Hit them hard and fast. We're not here to take prisoners." The Vanguard fired its remaining energy blasts, sending ripples of destruction through the hulls of the closest Shulnar warships. The remaining Earth ships fired in quick succession, taking advantage of the asteroid field's cover to avoid detection. They moved in perfect coordination, hitting one target after another, and then vanishing into the shadows once more. The Shulnar armada, initially thrown off by the decoys and surprise attacks, began to regroup, firing blindly into the asteroids. But they had underestimated the ferocity of humanity. Every strike from the Earth fleet took a heavy toll on their forces. The Shulnar were used to overwhelming their enemies with sheer force, but humanity's tactics, quick, brutal, and surgical, were turning the tide. "They're breaking, Captain," Nolan reported, his voice tinged with disbelief. "We've hit their flanks, and their formation is in chaos." Drake's eyes narrowed. The Shulnar might have faltered, but she knew they weren't done yet. "Don't let up. Hit them until they retreat. We can't afford to give them a second chance." The Earth fleet pressed forward with relentless precision. One by one, the Shulnar ships fell, their once mighty hulls burning in the cold vacuum of space. The Vanguard took the lead, its broken frame still standing strong, a symbol of humanity's resolve. The Shulnar had never encountered a species like this, a species that would not bend, not break, and never surrender. Then, as the final battle began to unfold, the Shulnar command ship, the Vornak, a massive warship that had been the spearhead of the invasion, appeared. It was larger, more heavily armored than any other ship in the fleet. Its weapons were nearly fully charged, and it was prepared to unleash a devastating strike. Drake looked at the screen, her eyes locking onto the Vornak. The stakes had never been higher. All ships target the Vornak. This ends now. The Vanguard moved into position, and the Earth fleet followed suit, forming a circle around the Shulnar command ship. Together, they launched everything they had, missile after missile, laser cannon fire, and concentrated energy beams. The Vornak's shields cracked, and for the first time, the Shulnar armada faltered. With a final, deafening explosion, the Vornak exploded into the void, its once proud form disintegrating into space. The Shulnar fleet, now broken and scattered, began to retreat. The survivors, no longer confident in their victory, turned tail and fled the field. Earth's forces had done the unthinkable. They had broken the invincible. Captain Drake stood silent for a moment, watching the remains of the battle unfold. The victory had come at a cost, but Earth had endured, standing against the impossible. They had not just survived. They had proven that no force, no matter how powerful, could ever crush humanity's spirit. "We've done it," Nolan whispered, a grin breaking through his exhaustion. Drake exhaled slowly, allowing herself the smallest of smiles. "No, Commander, we've just begun."